Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Martin Luther King Day Jr. reception and launch celebration. And also, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome the U.S. Consulate, and I would like to welcome also the African Heritage Society ran by Mutumwa Mawere, and I would also like to welcome in our midst Mr. Graham and Pam Fletcher from the Locher Ministries. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here. It is a wonderful day. It's a day of, I think, recognizing greatness, and for me also, that is nobility. And if you could indulge me for a little, I would like to recite a beautiful poem by Stephen Spender. It is called The Truly Great. And it goes like this. I think continually of those who are truly great, who from the womb remember the soul's history through corridors of light, where hours are suns, endless and singing, whose lovely ambition was that their lips, still touched with fire, should tell of the spirit clothed from head to toe in song, who hoarded from the spring branches the desires falling across their bodies like blossoms. What is precious is never to forget the essential delight of the blood drawn from the ageless springs, breaking through rocks in worlds before our earth. Never to deny its pleasure in the morning's simple light, nor its grave evening demand for life. Never to allow gradually the traffic to smother with noise and fog the flowering of the spirit. Near the sun, near the snow, near the sun in the highest fields, see how these names are fated by the waving grass and the streamers of white clouds and the whispers of the wind in the listening sky. The names of those who in their lives lived for life and fought for life, who wore at their hearts the fire's center. Born of the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun and left the vivid air signed in their honor. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my little dedication. Ties that bind us in our struggle and suffering. Ties that bind us in our trials and tribulations. Ties that bind us to exalt the phenomenal deeds of those that bore the burning torch that illuminated the dark side of mankind with the most sought out commodity in our society, which is peace. Ties that bind us to etch in the memory of posterity the knowing that they are the descendants of the ordinary men and women who had at their center an irresistible desire to do noble things and noble actions. And today, ladies and gentlemen, the launching of the Martin Luther King Day Alliance is a consequence of those noble actions and deeds. An extract from Stanley Crowd's sermon, ladies and gentlemen, a sermon he wrote for a track in the Premature Autopsy, Wynton Marsali's album, His Majesty's Blues, best encapsulates for me this nobility that I'm talking about. And I quote, and this is how it goes. Some people might ask, what is this man doing talking about nobility? Doesn't he know that this is a dragon-spawned and blood-encrusted century? Doesn't he know that the dragon breath of our time is breathing down the neck of the year 2000? Doesn't he know that this is the era of flash and cash? But I will tell them that the interwoven labyrinths of greed and manipulation are as old as the first lie. When you lie, you are trying to manipulate. And when you try to manipulate for false profit, you reveal your greed. And when you swallow that dust cooperatively, you reveal yourself as a chump, a sucker. One of those folks, P.T. Burnham says, is born every minute. But I will answer them also by saying that nobility is always born somewhere out there in the world. And when you live in a democratic nation, you have to face the mysterious fact that nobility has no permanent address. You have to face the fact that nobility has no private phone number. Nobility is not listed in the phone book. Nobility is not listed in the society column. Nobility shows up where it feels like showing up, and where it feels like showing up might just be about anywhere. If it could rise like a mighty light from the human livestock of the plantation, you know it can come from anywhere it wants to. You see, nobility is listed though. Nobility lists itself in the human spirit. And its purpose is to enlist the ears of the listener to the bittersweet song of spiritual concerns. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Martin Luther King fought for the brotherhood of men and against racial injustice. The latter is a travesty of mankind. But as James Baldwin wrote in his letter to his nephew, and I quote, "But remember, most mankind is not all mankind." Racial injustice, ladies and gentlemen, has been a tool for the economic and cultural oppression. But I would like to conclude by going back to James Baldwin as he concludes his letter to his nephew. And he writes a statement that disturbingly reverberates hauntingly through my consciousness and conscience as we have just celebrated 100 years of the ANC, of selfless struggle, and 18 years of our freedom. Our freedom, ladies and gentlemen, is only, what, 18 years old? And it's also just on the eve of coming of age. And I guess if we are, and I guess we are at the height, and if I may compare it with the development of human beings right in the grips of teenage pangs. However, getting back to James Baldwin, ladies and gentlemen, he writes and says to his nephew, "You know, and I know, that the country is celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too soon. We cannot be free until they are free." And just like, and the resonance of this, ladies and gentlemen, into the now came to me just like a sudden crash of a flying brick at the back of my head in the township, and shook my core and complacence. And for me, until they are free refers to those who are in this, who are held by this, who are under the stranglehold of poverty and joblessness. Economic freedom, ladies and gentlemen, in our lifetime, not in our lifestyle. Economic freedom, cultural freedom in its authenticity and diversity and diverse nature in our lifetime and not our lifestyle. Long live the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. Long live the spirit of peaceful protest in the wake of social and moral upheaval. Long live the spirit of selfless leadership. Long live the spirit of selfless struggle. Long live the spirit of selfless serving. Long live the spirit of unity in diversity. And long live the alliance of South Africa and the US through the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. Without much ado, I would like to call on Pastor Khalil Osiris to give us a vision statement. A big hand for him. Thank you.
Good evening. I first want to say how grateful I am for everyone who came out this evening. I know there's a lot of other things that you could have been doing, and there were a lot of people who asked me, why Martin Luther King? Why South Africa? Why now? And firstly, I'll say to the question, why Martin Luther King? Because his example in his life and in his legacy was one of unselfish struggle and sacrifice for a purpose, for a cause, and for a people beyond his own ethnic, racial, and national identity. He was always clear that our struggle is global, that the struggle for justice anywhere is a struggle for justice everywhere. So there was never any confusion on the part of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King with respect to the interconnectedness of all struggles for justice. Why South Africa? The links between South Africans and Americans, particularly African Americans, are so deep and so concrete that I have rarely met an African American who came here who did not get off the plane and start looking at South Africans and saying, "You look like my cousin. He looks like my uncle. Wait a minute, that looks like my sister." All the way down to the way that you dress. It's cultural, it's concrete, it's all of the things that you feel. But the other part of it is that so do all the other people in South Africa look like somebody you know. The Indians look like the folks you know in America. The Afrikaners, which I'm like still trying to figure that out. British Afrikaner, right? I know some of you know the ties are pretty thick and deep, but for us who from the outside, it doesn't hold much water. This 2012 year, for many of us who recognize that there is some significance to even the date, we know that 12 has a significance beyond just the number. It's a metaphor for something, a completion of sorts. And so it might be a little strange to see someone come from America here who's not a diplomat, not an elected official, not Jay-Z, and from the same state as Lil Wayne, but don't roll with him. Just a common person from America to come to South Africa and dare to dream that he could be part of the new South Africa. That somehow that there are binds, ties that connect us, that even a common person like me could come and be received from you who are common folk too. This should be about inclusion. This should be about you stepping outside your comfort zone and recognizing that there's an opportunity to do something new and something different and something exciting. It's about alliance building. It's about an opportunity to launch new ideas in a way that's creative and goes way beyond anything called a box. And so the goal of the MLK Day Alliance is very simple. It is to strengthen the cultural and economic ties between South Africans and Americans. There is a very concrete goal, and we have very concrete objectives that we're going to achieve. So the cultural and economic objectives are very clear for us, because we know that the individuals that Salo doesn't catch in his school, typically the angry young man, the angry young girl, more so the angry young man lands in jail or in prison when they're not reached at that critical juncture in their lives. And for many of us who know that reality, it's one that if we don't intervene and do something about early on, we're going to inherit the consequences of our negligence, which will be rising crime, rising rates of incarceration, and increased recidivism. That is to say, when those return, when those come back to society, they will return to prison for having violated their terms and committed more crimes. No one knows this better than me, having served 20 years in prison. I am one of those young men who wasn't reached. I was one of those angry, violent, misguided boys who didn't know what it meant to be a man, made the horrible choices, committed a robbery, landed in jail at the bottom of life. Not because I had a missing in action father or a mother who didn't care. No, both of them were present. I was at the top of my class academically. I was an outstanding athlete. Voted most likely to succeed, but more criminal than anyone on the streets that I came in contact with. Because the crime was not simply the behavior, the crime was the thinking. The crime was the misguided values. The crime was the distortion of my own identity about who I was as a young black man. And so I landed in prison, served 5 years, 17 years old to 22. Got out of prison more angry than when I arrived. The outcome was predictable. Within 3 years, I was back in prison. At 25, 2 children, I had become the absent father. And when my son, my oldest son, asked me, said, "Daddy, when are you coming home?" He didn't want to hear, well, you know, when the parole board lets me go. He didn't want to hear, well, there was an unjust criminal justice system that put me in prison. He didn't want to hear prosecutorial misconduct or racism. He didn't want to hear any of those things. He just wanted to know, when was I going to come home? And I recognized I put him in a position to ask a question that he should never have had to ask me as his father. That my selfishness and my distortions, that my self-imposed limitations led to that kind of reality for him and me. And it was then that I stopped blaming other people and took responsibility for where I was in my life. I recognized that I was in prison because I had been incarcerated long before I had ever been arrested, by virtue of my own thoughts and values and the distortions therein. So in this second incarceration, it was clear it was up to me to turn the tide, to make the change, to do the transformation, to be it. And so I began that work at a prison called Norfolk Prison Colony. It was the same prison that Malcolm Little became Malcolm X. His nickname in that prison was Satan. He was so anti-religious when he arrived that his first nickname was Satan, the great Malcolm X, who then was known as Malcolm Little. And I would walk in that library and know I was standing in a place that he stood. And it would rise up in my spirit. And I felt that obligation. And they were debating whether or not education impacted recidivism. And so Boston University, one of our great institutions, came into the prison and decided to do a program that was a pilot. It was an experiment. They wanted to see that if prisoners got an education, would they be more or less likely to return to prison. So a group of us were tested it. I tested a percentile that got me in the program, right? Don't think that I had to achieve too high. I mean, the reading level of the average prisoner was about a 4th grade level. Your primary school. So I got in. I earned my bachelor's and master's degree from Boston University while I was in prison. Yeah, in prison. At the same university where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. earned his doctorate degree, Boston University. So the roots for this idea, the motivation for this are very deep for me. They're very personal, they're very deep, and they're very, very spiritual. I know the other side. And I recognize, and this was my epiphany, I was incarcerated before I was arrested. That was insightful. But what was better than that, that if I was incarcerated before I was arrested, I could get out before I was released. I could get out before I was released. through the transformation of my own thoughts and values, through the transformation of those things which were my self-imposed limitations, through that very process, I could release myself without begging for permission to get out of the conditions that I had created. So I became the change. I learned how to live the change. So when we talk about doing a Martin Luther King Day observance, we're talking about transformation. We're talking about daring to inspire people to hope that something's possible, better than what they see. But this is not a pie in the sky hope. This is a earth and water scope. A hope. It's a hope that says you're going to start your school because you're going to have the money necessary to do it, and we're not going to have to beg for permission to get that money for you to do it because we have the resources to make it happen. You don't have to pray for what you can do out your pocket. Yeah. Some people are praying for things that they can go in their pocket and handle. You're wasting your prayers. Get in your pocket and make the change.